Okay, good Yom Tov, everyone. Good Yom Tov and good evening. Tonight is a big holiday, the 12th day of Tamuz. It's 98 years, which 98, I spoke Shabbos by our Kiddush over here, the significance of 98 when it comes to redemption. So it's a very, very, very special time. It's the redemption of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe from his imprisonment in Russia for his work in Yiddishkeit. And as we're going to learn now, what we're doing tonight is it's a hybrid between a class and a Farbrengen. I didn't plan this. This is all unplanned. I just decided 5 minutes ago to do this. I was searching to give a regular class in the parsha, and for whatever reason, my mochin, my head was not here. So I said, you know what? Let's just grab a book from the Rebbe and read right from it. So here I am sharing with you. It's usually much better than anything I can think of. So let's go. This is from the Rebbe's talk on Shabbos Parshas Chukaz Balak on the 12th day of Tamuz, 1989. Okay, so, and the Rebbe is talking about the holiday that happened to his father-in-law many years earlier. So let's read inside. First we say Lchaim. Lchaim, let the redemption seep and fill each and every one of us, both in an individual level, to be complete redemption from our own evil inclination, from all obstacles, spiritually, physically, and all the troubles and all the darknesses for the Jewish people and everything that is blocking should completely disintegrate and should be already completely, we're going to break through, and we are breaking through right now as we are studying here together. So I'm not learning with you from what I know. I'm learning from what is channeling right now. Okay, here we go. The Chag HaGeula, the 12th day of Tamuz, is particularly connected to the coming of Mashiach, the Rebbe says. The complete and the true and complete redemption through Mashiach Tzidkenu, our righteous Redeemer. How? What's the connection? So he says, in general, all elements of redemption, even a redemption of an individual person, are connected one to each other. In other words, when a redemption happens to any person, Shalom Mordechai Rubashkin came out of jail many years ago. That was connected to the coming of Mashiach. Or any type there is someone who's in trouble for whatever reason and ends up in some kind of a predicament and then he experiences a redemption, it's all connected to the ultimate redemption because we're all really all one organism. Now, where do we see that all redemptions are connected to each other? Well, we know that from what the Gemara says. The Gemara says in Masechtas Megillah, Maro loy megeula b'shvius. Why is the seventh blessing of the Shemona Esrei, of the Amida, the blessing on about Geula, like we say, Re'einu b'anyenu, God see our suffering, our pain, Ugaleinu Geula Shalema, and redeem us a great redemption. But we say that that's the seventh blessing. So why did the sages put the blessing in which we are requesting and the request for a redemption? Why is that the seventh blessing? And the sages answer, because we're going to be redeemed in the seventh. Simply, it means in the seventh year of the Shemitah, on the sabbatical, as the sages say that b'matzah Shemitah ben David ba, in the end of Shemitah, Mashiach comes. I'll say another pirush over here. We're going to be redeemed in the seventh with the seventh Rebbe. That's what we're going to be. That's what it means in the seventh generation. You can take that or leave that, but that's my own pirush. Lefikach kavu'uhu b'shviyas. That's why the sages put the blessing Re'einu b'anyenu as the seventh blessing. Now the Talmud asks the question, Afagav. What's the question? The Gemara asks, and Rashi. So Rashi asks the question, Rashi and the Gemara Masechtas Megillah, Afagav da hai gula lav gula de golasi. Re'einu b'anyenu, see our suffering and redeem us from our troubles, is not talking about the coming of Mashiach. Because the blessings of the coming of Mashiach are further in Shemona Esrei. when he says V'Yerushalayim Mircha, it starts with the Kabah Shofar Gadol, blow with the great shofar. Hashiva Sheftenu, return our leaders, our Sanhedrin. And then mainly V'Yerushalayim Mircha, God returned to Jerusalem. Esemach David Avdecha Meheres Atzmiach, the plant of David, that's referring to Mashiach. So that part of the Shemona Esrei, that's the latter part of the Shemona Esrei. That part is talking about the redemption. So Re'ei Nabanyenu means just any type of predicament that we're in, or have a situation, we're asking for a redemption. You know, if you're in a predicament, you can't pay your mortgage, and you feel imprisoned financially, and then something happens, and suddenly, you know, a business venture or a deal that you've been stuck and been blocked for months and for whatever suddenly opens up, or some other unexpected financial income or whatever it is comes through, and suddenly that's what we're asking for. That's the redemption we're talking about. So as it says, Rashi says that Hashem should save us from the troubles that come upon us all the time. Like in our case, from Iran, let's say. Okay, even though this time it's actually connected to the greater redemption, or from Hamas, or from whatever it is, or from this Mandani, whatever his name is, that insane. I don't even know his name. Whatever, I don't want to know his name. The anti-Semite is running for mayor in New York. Whatever these are, for all these troubles. Rashi says, however, but notwithstanding, since it's called a geula, Rashi says, since if a person experienced a redemption, you know, we're all asking for our own God to extract us from a situation. Since it's called a geula, it's called a redemption, it belongs in the seventh blessing, because the great Jewish redemption is going to happen on the seventh. What's the connection? This is a private person who's experiencing an immense financial pressure and has a moment of, you know, like Yehuda Ma'isa, a moment of Hashem sent him a Yeshua, God sent him a salvation, and yet we say, make that request on the seventh, because the seventh is the one where redemption comes. What does it have to do? The redemption that is going to happen in the seventh is the great grand redemption of all of Israel and of the entire world. And what does it have to do with a personal struggle of a certain individual? Rashi says it's connected. Because every redemption, Rashi says, Shem Geula Allah. Because it's called Geula, it shares the same word, redemption. It plugs into the greater redemption. So if that's true about any person's redemption, even regular people, individual people, so how much more so when we're talking about not a private person, but someone who's the leader of the generation? Which, we know that the leader of the generation is like the entire generation. Because the leader is everybody. This is a quote that he's quoting from Rashi in Parshas Chukas, last week's Torah portion. Rashi says that the leader of the generation is like the entire generation. Why? Because Moshe, in one place it says that Moshe sent to the king of Edom to negotiate passage for the Jews to enter the land of Israel. We spoke about it in last week's class. Elsewhere it says, Vayishlach Yisrael, Israel sent, seeming to say that the one who sent was not Moshe, but the Jewish people sent messengers. So which one was it? Was it Moshe sending, or was it Israel sending? So Rashi says, Yisrael hem Moshe, v'Moshe hem Yisrael. Moshe is Israel, and Israel is Moshe. Why? To teach you that the leader of the generation is the entire generation. By the way, it's very interesting how that comes out, Parshas Chukas, which is usually Gimel Tamuz, which comes to tell you about the leader of the generation, that he is the entire generation. Kalima de Parsha Seinu, like it says in our Parsha. So when it's a redemption for the leader of the generation, it's definitely a redemption for all the Jewish people. So it definitely connects to the ultimate redemption. Particularly, according to the words of the previous Rebbe, who writes particularly, in other words, this idea that the leader of the generation is like the entire generation, and therefore something that happens to him is really impacting all of the Jewish people, and therefore it's connected to the ultimate redemption. We can make that assumption. But over here he says, the previous Rebbe didn't only we're not making that assumption, he himself said that about his redemption. Why? On the first anniversary of the day, the previous Rebbe came out of prison. He was arrested and then came out and was released in 1927. In 1928, these days were established as a holiday. The previous Rebbe wrote a letter that it should be considered a holiday amongst the Jewish people. And when he wrote that letter, he wrote these words: it wasn't me alone that God redeemed on the 12th day of Tamuz, which, by the way, it's the previous Rebbe's birthday as well. He was redeemed on his birthday. But all those who hold the Torah dear to their hearts, all of those who care about the Torah, who love the Torah, were also redeemed. Shomrei mitzvah, and all those who observe mitzvot. Vegam, and the previous Rebbe says, and how about Jews that don't care so much, don't study Torah, don't have affection to the Torah, don't keep the mitzvahs? They too were redeemed on this day. They might just not know it, but they too were redeemed on it. Vegam, he adds, even those who just have a nickname as Jew. In other words, they look at their Jewishness just as a nickname, not even their primary identity. Even they were redeemed on this day. Which means even those who so barely identify that they're Jewish, they were also redeemed on this day. Which means that this is a general redemption for all Jews. So for sure, this day is connected to Mashiach's coming. Even though it happened 98 years ago, and as of this moment of the class, Mashiach has not yet fully revealed itself. But the energy of the ultimate redemption was already present in the world 98 years ago on this day. Now the Rebbe adds more. It's not only because, till now, we haven't found a connection between the content of the previous Rebbe's redemption and the ultimate redemption. The only thing that we found was that since he is the leader of the Jewish people, and therefore his redemption was a redemption of all the Jewish people, so therefore it connects to the ultimate redemption, which is also going to be a redemption of all the Jewish people. But now he wants to connect it and make it even more directly connected. Mashiach's arrival is dependent on the teachings of the holy Baal Shem Tov reaching the entire world. How do we know that? Because the Mashiach said that to the Baal Shem Tov. I cannot come until the Baal Shem Tov's holy soul went up to heaven 50, 60, 70 years ago. He went into the holy chamber of Mashiach and he asked him, when are you coming? Mashiach said, when your wellsprings of Hasidism will reach the entire world, even the furthest places, that's when I will come. Now, a major milestone and a major breakthrough in Hasidism reaching the entire world happened on the 12th day of Tammuz 98 years ago. Because as a direct result of the previous Rebbe being released from prison, that led to him leaving Soviet Russia, which until that time, Hasidism was mainly in Eastern Europe. Chabad Hasidism was mainly in Russia. Hasidism in general was mainly in Europe, and even there in Eastern Europe primarily. But as a result of the previous Rebbe being released, eventually coming to the shores of the United States, bringing along with him a center of Hasidism to the United States of America, which is considered very far which is considered distant and removed from the centers of holiness. Not only that, he brought along his son-in-law, who followed him a year later, who would later succeed his leadership and become the next Chabad Rebbe. And he would initiate and begin a program that literally will carry the teachings of Hasidus. He will set up centers dotting the entire globe, literally speckling or sprinkled across the entire globe. And all those places are teaching Hasidism. So when we say that Hasidism will reach the farthest places, it was a direct result of the 12th day of Tamuz. So that further connects this day to the coming of Mashiach. And even more so, Hagola de Yud Beis Tamuz, the redemption of the 12th day of Tamuz was the beginning of Psicha, and it was the opening, the Seder Chadash, to a new order, in the spreading of the well springs outside. Even in the lower hemisphere, the lower half of the globe. Again, the emphasis in Mashiach's telling of the Baal Shem Tov is that we will go far. The teachings of your teachings need to go to the farthest of places. What's called far? Farther you go from Israel is called far. According to this idea, is the concept we spoke about it many times, the lower half of the world, the lower half of the globe. We look at the world today's days, the way it's divided, the upper half and the lower half. North Pole is on the top, but not necessarily the North Pole is on the top. You can, in a circle, there's no top and bottom, so you can make it anyway. So according to Torah, Israel is the top. So based on that, the upper part is what half of the globe that's surrounding Israel, the upper part, and the United States, Australia, and all of this is on the bottom. So down and under. So we say that the lower part of the globe is the farthest away from holiness, and with Hasidism will reach there, including Los Angeles, over here where we're giving this class, and where people across the world are tuning in and getting their Hasidic fix, right? So many people get their Hasidic fix and high, and Mashiach high, from teachings that come from LA. So that's the well springs of the Baal Shem Tov reaching everywhere and spreading all across the world. And that's what he says over here. Not only will we reach the lower half of the world, but when the lower half of the globe becomes the spring where the upper part of the world drinks from, the spring from the lower part of the world, that's super cool, the Rebbe says. And the spreading, the headquarters to spread the springs takes place from the lower hemisphere, from the lower part of the world, Canal Ba'aruch, like we said earlier, which this produces the completion of the idea that the spreading of Hasidus should spread outward. Which that allows the promise of Mashiach, that when will Mashiach come? When the springs will be spread everywhere. Comes out that what he just did is he directly linked the previous Rebbe's being freed from Soviet imprisonment. That has a direct impact on the coming of Mashiach, because that kind of allowed for the last push, the last spiritual infusion. Now, we've been working towards Mashiach for thousands of years, but the last and final program and push that's going to be needed, and that is to flood the world with Hasidism, that phase, we might say, that last phase began on the 12th day of Tamuz. I once gave a whole interesting class last year, or 2 years ago. I spoke about it a few times. How at the same time the previous Rebbe, in the same year the previous Rebbe was released, 7-Eleven opened up as a convenience store, and which was first an ice market, and then it started in Texas. God should have mercy on Texas and on the victims, the all those that are still lost. They should still find people alive. It's so horrific to watch those little children. It's like heartbreaking. we're done already with all these catastrophes and all these dark elements. This is all like the last bites of exile. It's just so unnecessary anymore. So we're asking Hashem already to have mercy, and Hashem should heal all the broken hearts that have been so broken from this horrible, unexpected disaster, especially when little children are involved. It's in any case, 7/11 was started in Texas, and we gave a whole discussion how it has to do with the power of Mashiach, which is 7 and 11. Because once the previous Rebbe was released from Russia, the next phase was to go to America. I spoke about it this past Shabbos in the shul as well. That was like next on the agenda. It's like that completed a certain level of purification of the world, and we were ready for the final conquest, which is going to involve moving the center, the headquarters of Judaism to the United States, and from America, let the lights spread across the entire world. Based on all of this, so now the Rebbe is going to say, okay, so now let's look into the day itself. The holiday is the 12th of Tamuz and the 13th of Tamuz. Why 2 days? So we explained this many times, because the previous Rebbe was given notification that he is redeemed, that he's being set free on the 12th of Tammuz. That was barely a week after he arrived in his place of exile. He arrived there, he was there for a week, and then they let him know that he's leaving, that he's free to go. He was supposed to be there for 3 years. They released him, a miracle. But on the 12th of Tammuz, I don't know what was the secular date, but that day was an official holiday in Soviet Russia. So the offices, all government offices, were closed on that day, like a July 4th type of situation. The government offices. So the government office that was supposed to hand him his release papers were closed. So he needed to come on the 13th of Tammuz to pick up his papers so that he can officially, leave his place of exile and return back and go on what we speak, go on with his life. So that's the reason it's the 12th and 13th of Tammuz. And the Rebbe is now going to look deeply into the meaning of these 2 days and how it relates to the redemption of all of Israel. In the time of the redemption, Yud Beis Tammuz, the 12th of Tammuz. This is indicative, this is symbolizing the redemption of the Jewish people. Because how many tribes are there? 12 tribes. This is coming to symbolize that even though it was a redemption of one person, it's really the redemption of all 12 tribes. Shiftei Ka, which are known as the tribes of God. One of the great qualities of the future redemption, or I like to call it the current redemption. One of the great qualities is like the Rebbe always says, no Jew will be left behind. Everybody is coming home. Sheba yigalu kol b'nei Yisrael mamish. All the Jewish people are coming. Kol yud beis hashvatim, all 12. Ad, so much so, shafilu Yehudi echad lo yashar b'golos, even one Jew will not remain in exile. Everybody is coming back. Even the Jews are going to be coming back kicking and screaming. They too are coming back. Doesn't make a difference. Even those Jews that are sadly marching on the pro-Palestinian, campaigning for Gaza and fighting against, Israel. Even those Jews are being redeemed. No one is staying behind. Everybody's coming along. As he brings in footnote 9, which isn't the case in other redemptions that happened after the Torah was given. We have many redemptions. For example, after the 70 years of exile, when we returned to build a second temple, after the Babylonian and Persian exile, even from the 2 tribes, which were Judah and Benjamin, not everybody returned. And definitely not the 10 tribes that were scattered, and we don't even know exactly where they are. Even those who believe, according to the opinion, there's different opinions in the Talmud, Masechta Sanhedrin, what happened to the 10 tribes. But even those who say that they got, they're behind the dark mountains, whatever that means. They never returned in the Second Temple era. They're not together with Israel. So that's what makes this redemption stand out, that it's going to be everybody. Okay. Another connection, he says, before we get, so that's 12. Another connection is in the fact that that's the 12th of Tamuz. But in footnote 7, he says it's also connected because it's Tamuz. We know that Tamuz is the month where the 3 weeks begin, in which the 3 weeks are the days of darkness and of sadness from the 17th of Tammuz until when the walls of Jerusalem were breached. And then until the 9th of Av, when the Holy Temple was set on fire and the exile commenced, that's the period of the year in which we mourn the destruction and we mourn the exile. And that's why Tammuz and Av have traditionally been very dark months for the Jewish people. We have, however, prophecies that prophesize that these months and these fast days, which are 2 fast days, the 17th of Tammuz and Tisha B'Av, and in between them 3 weeks of sadness, these fast days are going to become the greatest festivals. They're going to be flipped over. Including in that is that Tammuz will be flipped over. So if the previous Rebbe was redeemed in the month of Tammuz, that too is already indicating a relationship to the ultimate redemption when Tammuz will be flipped. So that's another connection that he makes. So that's 12. So you got the connection of Tammuz, you have the connection of 12, and we have one more connection. Shleimus HaGeula, the previous Rebbe, as we said earlier, needed to get his papers, he needed to wait one more day. Yud Gimel Tammuz on the 13th of Tammuz. Do as it is known should be Yud Beis Tammuz Nisbaser Shuchav Shimegalusa. That on the 12th of Tammuz he was notified that he's freed from his redemption. But the actual redemption happened on the 13th of Tammuz. So what is special about 13? 13 is Bigamatria Echad. We know the Hebrew word Echad, which means one, is spelled Aleph Ches Daled. Now, Aleph Ches Daled, numeric, is 13. Aleph is 1, Ches is 8, Daled is 4, is 13. Bigamatria Echad, which is the prominent feature of the ultimate redemption. What's going to happen when the redemption happens? It's a universal redemption. It's not just a redemption to the Jewish people. The entire world will be liberated from its exiled state. What's its exiled state? That we're disconnected from God. When Mashiach will come, God will be revealed. As the verse says, and what does it mean God will be revealed? We will realize that everything is God. That all of existence is all is the expression of God Almighty. That's it. And everything is all unified with that oneness of God. Like the verse says, Bayomahu, on that day, Yeh, Hashem Echad, God will be one, Ushmo Echad, and his name will be one. It doesn't only mean we'll only recognize one God. It means we'll realize that God is one. The universe is all one with God. Everything is Him. Heaven is Him. Earth is Him. Time and space is Him. It's all Him. And that's the number 13. 13, which is Echad. So the previous Rebbe being redeemed, he actually went out on the day of 13, is indicating that his redemption is connected to the revelation of Echad, of God's unity. And what do you think Hasidus, the previous Rebbe, as we said before, brought Hasidus to the Father? What is the cornerstone of Hasidism? Echad, oneness. Hasidism reveals how all Jews are one. That's why we have to love everyone like we love ourselves. And Hasidus reveals how the universe is all one with God and how we're supposed to serve Hashem in every situation and everything is all unified with God. That God is revealed in the entire world, which is in the word Echad, it's actually not only that the general number is 13, but also the details. The Aleph of Echad is 1, symbolizing God, and the Ches and the Daled symbolizes the rest of space. Daled is 4, which are the 4 directions, and the Ches is 8, which 8 is the earth is 1 and the 7 heavens, 7 skies. Together is 8. So when you say Echad, what you mean is that the Aleph, which is God, reveals himself in all of the directions and all aspects of space. That all of space is enveloped in oneness. And that's Mashiach. God will be one. Good, that's chapter 1. This particular year, the Rebbe says, in 1989, when he gave the talk, is even more connected. Because the Rebbe always finds, like, even in the smallest elements, there is always a connection. Again, this might not be so applicable to us this year, but still, this year is whatever we happened then is still here. And this year probably has a whole bunch of new things that connect it even more. Because we're only adding on, we're not subtracting. Aleph. That particular year, 1989, the 12th day of Tamuz fell on Shabbos, the day the Rebbe was giving the talk. B'yom HaShabbos. And the Rebbe says, if it falls on Shabbos, what is Shabbos if not Mashiach? Yom HaShabbos, b'chlal kasher magula asid. Shabbos is a rest day. And what's for Mashiach's time? Also going to be the rest, the ultimate rest. The world will finally be in a state of tranquility. Because all the difficulties and harshness of the world is because we're busy fixing. Mashiach will come, it'll be already the fixed world. So there's going to be a certain depth, a certain tranquility and peacefulness in the world, which is symbolized by every Shabbos. So when Yud Beis Tammuz falls out on Shabbos, of course it reminds you that it's related to the ultimate Shabbos. Like it is known from the Song of Shabbos. Mizmor Shir Liyom Shabbos. Every day in the week has its particular song. And Shabbos has its song. When we say its song, the song that the Levites would sing in the Holy Temple. So this, and we say it today as well. Mizmor Shir Liyom Shabbos. So the sages say, Liyom Shekule Shabbos Menucha. That the song of Shabbos, which is Psalm 92 in Tehillim, that song is referring to the day when it will be only Shabbos. L'chayei lamim, for the one who lives eternally. Also in the grace after the meal on Shabbos, what do we say? Harachaman, may the merciful one, who yanchilenu, he should inherit to us, l'yom shekulei Shabbos, to a day that will be completely Shabbos, umenucha, and rest, l'chayei lamim, for all eternity. Kiven shekol Shabbos ume'ein v'dugmas yom shekulei Shabbos umenucha l'chayei lamim, because we know that every Shabbos, every Saturday, is a little taste of the world to come. So how much more so the special Shabbos that has within it the 12th of Tamuz, the Shabbos that has Yud Beis Tamuz, which Yud Beis Tamuz, even when it comes out like this week on a Tuesday, this year it comes out on a Tuesday, is already connected to Mashiach. How much more so when it comes out on Shabbos? Very good. Beis, Parshas HaShavua, Kepiskim, HaRabbeinu Azaken Shetzrichim Lichrisem Azman. The other thing is the Torah portion that we read that Shabbos. This does apply this year. Which parsha do we read? Parshas Chukas Balak. Now the Rebbe is going to emphasize mainly Balak, because this year actually Yud Beis Tammuz falls out in the week of Balak. The year the Rebbe was talking about, 1989, it was a double portion. Sometimes there's a double portion. Chukas and Balak is together. But this year Chukas was separate, was last week, and Balak is this week. Now the main parsha the Rebbe is after is Balak. Why is this such a significant Torah portion? Because Balak is all about the prophecies of redemption. And especially the portion that relates to Shabbos. We know that the parsha is divided in 7 readings. And every day we read another reading. Shabbos, we read the 7th reading. So the end of Parshas Balak has the most explicit prophecies about Mashiach. Where the Torah talks about the arrival of King Mashiach. Like the Rambam says, the Rambam says on the obligation that we have to believe in the Mashiach. Anybody that doesn't believe in him or doesn't await his coming, he's quoting Rambam over Maimonides. He's not only denying all the prophets, he is denying the entire Torah, and he's denying Moshe, because the Torah itself testified, declared that Mashiach will come. Where did the Torah declare that? So Rambam brings a second place. The first place is in Deuteronomy, but the second place the Rambam brings is the Torah portion Balak. After Parshas Bilam Nemar, and in the Parsha of Bilam it says, V'sham niba b'shnei ha-meshichim. Over there, he prophesied regarding the 2 anointed ones. The Rambam refers to King David as the first Mashiach. And the King Mashiach, the descendant of King David, he is considered the final Mashiach. He's considered the latter Mashiach. Mashiach Harishon Shu David Mashiach Achron Shoim Mibanu Shemashiach Yisrael. And the latter Mashiach that gets up from his children, that saves the Jewish people Bachroin at the end. Shamu Weimer, and over there he says, I see him and not now. So Rambam says, he quotes the verse this week's in the Torah portion, that Bilam had a vision. He says, I see him in the distance. As the Rambam goes on to detail all the verses in our parsha. The Rambam goes and he splits every one of the verses, and in which he implies that the first half of the verse is referring to King David. And the second half is referring to King Mashiach. So even though this is stated in the Torah all the time, but it's highlighted in the time that we read it in the Torah. In other words, what the Rebbe is saying, the Torah is eternal. Every word of Torah is absolute, and it is true every moment of every verse of the Torah is true every moment of time. However, that particular week, when a certain part of the Torah is being read, and that particular day, that's the day in which that part of the Torah is now underlined, bold, and highlighted. In other words, the spotlight is shining on those verses, which means that those energies that are in those verses are dominating on that day. So since the Rebbe is trying to find how Yud Beis Tammuz is connected to Mashiach. Well, Yud Beis Tammuz most of the years comes out in this week's Torah portion, Parshas Balak. Especially then when it came out on Shabbos, Parshas Balak. So, and on Shabbos is when we read those very verses. So you see that the energy of Mashiach is very, very dominant and very present. And therefore, it's highlighting how Yud Beis Tammuz 98 years ago, which reoccurs every year, because once it happened, it's happening every year even stronger and stronger, is now further emboldened and shining. Okay. On this Chag HaGeula, the 12th day of Tamuz. Oh, now, it's not only Parshas Balak, which we read, but what is read, we know on Shabbos we read in the Torah twice. Once Shabbos in the morning and once Shabbos in the afternoon. Shabbos in the afternoon, we always read the next Torah portion, which in this case, this coming Shabbos and the Shabbos the Rebbe was talking about, in the afternoon we started reading Pinhas. which is the following Torah portion. Now Pinhas, the sages say, Pinhas is the man who gets up and he's the zealot who kills the prince of the tribe of Shimon who cohabited with this Midianite girl. And he killed them and he stopped the plague. And God salutes him. God takes off his hat, so to speak, for Pinhas. Says, wow, he's the hero. So we know the sages tell us that Pinhas is Elijah the prophet. He's the same person. Pinhas is Eliyahu. Pinhas is Elijah. And we know that Elijah the prophet, Eliyahu Hanavi, is a major component of the final redemption, because he's the one who announces Mashiach's arrival. Which we know Pinhas is Eliyahu. That idea that Pinhas is Eliyahu is stated in Targum. Yonas, it's a midrashic source. It's a Targum Yonasan ben Uziel, and it's stated in the Zohar. Now the Rebbe says on the bottom over here, it's a little strange to say Pinhas Eliyahu. If anything, it should say Eliyahu ze Pinhas. Because who was first? Pinhas was first. Eliyahu is a prophet that appears later after King David. Pinhas is still is a character alive in the time of the Jewish people in the desert. So the right way of saying it is Eliyahu. You should know that this Eliyahu, he really is Pinhas. He's the same man, not Pinhas Eliyahu. So the Rebbe asks that question over here. So he says, based on what it says in the Zohar, that Eliyahu, before he became Pinhas, before Pinhas was born, the soul of Pinhas was Eliyahu, and he was an angel. A soul, it must have been a hybrid, a soul and an angel, because we know angels are lower than souls. So he was already an active, angelic being. Then he came down as a human, and that was Pinhas. And he lived a long life, and he somehow evolves into this, gets a new name called Eliyahu, and he's the prophet Eliyahu. And then he reverts back to an angel state. So first he moves from an angel to human, and then he moves back from human to angel, because he's the only person we know, him and Chanoch, who went up with their body to heaven and never, ever was buried, never, right? Because he didn't die. As it says in the, in Malachim, it describes his ascent up to heaven with the fiery chariots. He literally goes up. So, anyways, Pinchas Eliyahu, Mevasar Agula, all of them are regarding him. It says, "Hinini noisen loyas brishi shalem." I'm giving him my covenant of peace. Asher inyan. Now, if God gives him the covenant of peace, means that he is the one who comes. He is the peacemaker. Now we know that until Mashiach comes, there's no peace in the world. One of the main achievements of Mashiach is that there won't be any war anymore. The world will finally be at peace with itself, at peace with God. Nations will be at peace with each other. There won't be internal conflict inside the heart of the human being. Couples will live in peace and in harmony. Families will all live in harmony and unification. Communities will live in peace and in oneness with each other. All of creation will be in peace. Who is the one who's given the gift of peace? Pinhas. Barisi, I'm giving him the covenant of peace. So if he's the one who carries the covenant of peace, so we understand why he's so pivotal for Mashiach. He will lead the way. He's like carrying the torch to the redemption, the torch of peace. Which is going to be through Mashiach. And Mashiach will arrive. Now, we on Shabbos, we learned Rabbi Yossi HaGalili a few weeks ago. Said an interesting teaching that when Mashiach will come to the world, his first word he will say, he will open up his first message to the world will be the message of peace. As it says, Mashmiya Shalom Evaser Tov. that Mashiach is coming to Mashmiach Shalom. He comes us to hear peace. He will bring peace. So Pinhas, who is the man who is peace, and he precedes Mashiach. He announces Mashiach's arrival. So what does it all have to do over here? Very good. On Yud Beis Tamuz, on the 12th day of Tamuz, we are reading Pashas Pinhas, further connecting the redemption of the 12th day of Tamuz to the ultimate redemption. That's number 2. That's the second connection the Rebbe says of that particular year, which this particular second piece applies to this year as well. Because this week is Parshas Balak, and the Shabbos after Yud Beis Tammuz, we're going to read Parshas Pinchas, but the Shabbos is still connected. Fine. Gimel. Third thing applied in 1989 particularly, because that year was 40 years since the previous Rebbe passed away. The Rebbe is going to explain. Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak passed away in 1950. 1989 was within the 40th year from his passing. The Rebbe very much was insisting, and insists rather, that just like by Moses, it took 40 years for the people to really absorb his message, to understand him and to really integrate what Moshe taught. The same is also, the Rebbe says regarding the leader of the generation, it takes 40 years for people to really assimilate his teaching. So there's a certain shleimus, a certain perfection. It says after 40 years, God gives you a heart to know, eyes to hear, eyes to see, and ears to hear. And a person can reach the mind of their teacher. And how much more so the day of his redemption, which is also his birthday. Which that, remember we said that earlier, when the person's mazel is very strong. So without a question, all matters of redemption are very, very, very intense, he says. Are in a very, very, very powerful and very expressed. Particularly that the number 40 is connected with the attribute of Bina, which, why? Because the sages say that when Ben Arbaim Lebina, when you're 40 years old, that's when you reach a certain maturity of understanding. And we know mystically that Bina is associated with redemption. Alma Dechera, Inyan Acheres Ve'Yagula. Bina is called the world of freedom. There is So it comes out because of all these reasons, there is a very deep connection between redemption and it. Now we go to chapter Gimel. Third chapter. This idea, this redemption, is the redemption in general. Again, now he's going to observe redemption in general. The redemption in general, including the redemption that started on the 12th day of Tammuz, as we said earlier, 98 years ago, in 1927. Doesn't only impact the Jewish people. The redemption is going to impact the entire world. Because the Jewish people are meant to uplift the entire world. So this impact is that the entire world enters a time of redemption, not just the Jewish people. And that is connected, and in that we're going to see a connection of the 12th day of Tammuz and redemption. Because till now he only spoke mainly of the Jewish people. Jewish people are 12, right? Israel. But over here, he's going to make it global. By first prefacing a explanation regarding something that it says in Tractate Shabbos. Kivan Shagu'ula Kshudim Shabbos, since redemption is connected to the day of Shabbos, since we know the rule that God looks in the Torah and through the Torah He creates the world. So if you want to know much about Shabbos, you got to first look at Masechta Shabbos. So by understanding Masechta Shabbos, you get a better understanding in redemption. So the Rebbe says, we have to look deeper into Masechta Shabbos, tractate Shabbos, and we'll glean insight regarding the redemption. Now, tractate Shabbos has like a whole bunch of chapters. Not sure how many chapters are in Masechta Shabbos, but I think more than 20. How do you know which part of Masechta Shabbos to learn? Masechta Shabbos is one of the longest tractates that there are in Shas. I think it's only second to Masechtas Baba Basra. It's a very long tractate, Masechta Shabbos. So how do you know in which page to look, or which chapter? So the Rebbe says the 7th chapter, because redemption is connected to 7, as we said earlier. Kol hashvi and chavivin, hakasher minyan hagula, that's connected to the redemption. So over there, the sage is saying regarding in Masechta Shabbos in the 7th chapter, it says, Klal gadol shabayin izbaru pratei malachas b'Shabbos. Avos malachas arba'im chasarachas. Over there, it says that the types of work that are forbidden on Shabbos, the sages say, are 40 minus 1, which means 39. And the Mishnah goes ahead to tell you what those 39 types of work are. Azoreya, to plant or to sow. Hachoresh, to plow. Makabapatish, giving the last bang with a hammer, which is completing something. Hamoitzim rishus l'shus, giving a few examples. Carrying things from one domain to another domain. Elu avos malachos. So it says, the Mishnah says over there, these are the fathers of, when we say fathers, it means these are the main categories of work. Why we call them fathers is because each one of these produce a whole family of offshoots, which are also considered types of work, but they all belong in one category. But how many primary categories are there of work, of labor, of Shabbat that are forbidden? Types of work that are forbidden on Shabbat? They are 40 minus 1. It's a very strange thing. Why do the sages keep on saying 40 minus 1? Why don't they just say 39? So here the Rebbe says there's a very deep secret pertaining to the redemption of the world. What is that? The Mefarshim, the commentaries on the Mishnah ask many questions. Why does it say 40 minus 1? Why doesn't it say just short? 39 types of work. The Talmud actually uses the term 39, but not the Mishnah. Talmud says that from the word Dvarim, Hadvarim, Ela Hadvarim, Elu Shloishim B'Teisha Malacha Shenemer L'Moshe Messina. From here we learn out there are 39 types of labor that are forbidden that was said to Moshe at Sinai. From the word in the end of the book of Exodus, second to the last Torah portion, Parshas Vayakel, it says over there that Moshe gathers the Jewish people to tell them how to build the tabernacle. But before that, he warns them about Shabbos, that you have to keep Shabbos. And you're not allowed to build even the tabernacle on Shabbos. And what does he say to them? Ela hadvarim. These are the words that God spoke. So the sages derive from those words, Ela hadvarim, all 39 types of work. And over here, it's hinted to. Why? We'll use gematria. Ele, the word ele, is numeric value of 36. Aleph, Lamed, Hey, 36. This is one of the unique places where halacha uses gematria. Usually halacha is halacha. And gematria is gematria. Gematria more for the Kabbalists, for the people who like having a good time in the Torah. And the halacha is for the serious folks who like to discuss but the gematria is more for the, right? But over here we find that the gematria is used even by the halacha. And they say, how do we get 39? So the Talmud says, Eile is gematria 36. Then it says, Hadavarim, the things. So since it says things, we know at least two. It doesn't say thing, it says things. So you add another two. So from 36, it becomes 38. But it doesn't say Eile Devarim, it says Eila HaDevarim. This is the things. The extra hey adds one more. Got 39. So again, the sages derived from Eila HaDevarim 39. And the sages say that this was really revealed to Moshe. God spoke to Moshe, gave him all the 39, but it doesn't say explicitly in the Chumash 39 types of work. But it's hinted to in this word. Fine. But the main thing is that the sages over there say 39. They don't say 40 minus 1. Yet the Mishnah is saying 40 minus 1. Why is that? Base. Next question. And in the work itself, when the Mishnah begins to enumerate what are the 39, it lists all 39. But it lists it starting with sowing meaning putting seeds in the ground, and then plowing. So sowing is first and plowing is second. But that's the reversed order. You don't sow and then plow. You plow, soften the ground, and then you put the seeds. So why is the Mishnah not following the order and the way it's done? It's a little confusing. If you're trying to write things in an order that people should understand it better. So you're talking about field work, farming work, or agriculture. So you start with the first thing is you plow the ground. Then you plant. Why does it start the opposite? Gimel, third question. When it comes to the conclusion of all the 39, why does it conclude with carrying from one domain to another domain? That's the last one. The last one should have been makabepatish, which means, what does makabepatish mean? Makabepatish means that when a smith would produce any type of a utensil, would do the work, or a carpenter. After they finished making a wooden bench or a wooden chair or a metal a metal table. The last thing they would do, they would take the hammer and give it one last bang, boom. And that was meant that if any screw or any nail is not like really, really set in, you give it that last bang, and that's like, now it's finished. So what happens if on Shabbos, everything was done before Shabbat. The last bang was not done, but the guy wants to so he comes and it's already Shabbos already, and he knows the guy's going to come pick it up. After Shabbos, he doesn't want to have to be busy with it anymore. So he comes on Shabbat, takes the hammer, and gives it that last psh. That's one of the 39 labors of Shabbos. And obviously, the sages from here apply it to many things that are forbidden because it's considered the last bang that finishes something. Now, that's the grand finale. So that would have been the best type of work. Now, if the Mishnah is looking for a list of types of labor that are forbidden, and you want to put the last one, this would have been a perfect last one. Because the whole content of the job is that it's the last bang. So why don't we put this last? Instead, we put carrying from one domain to another domain. It would make sense to complete all the work with this. Yet we don't. In a kuda sabir bezeh. So now in chapter 4, he says, so what's the main point of the explanation of this? The avodah sa'adam in a person's service is as follows. So the Rebbe is going to explain it more in our service to God. In other words, the Rebbe's explanation is not going to be halachically, but it's going to be more spiritually and referring to man's impact on the world in general. Hatam de mispar arbaim hu keneged malacha malachtoi umalacha shebetayra. What's the reason we have 40 kinds of 40 labors that are forbidden? So the Talmud says in Tractate Shabbos, another reason that we said earlier. We said earlier we derive it from the words Elah HaDevarim, 39. The sages have another place from where they found a remez, a symbol or a hint in the Torah that are 39. They said if you count, the word labor is mentioned in the Torah 40 times. The word malacha. The entire Torah, the word malacha, it's either the word malacha or malachto or meleches 40 times. Shabbat Torah. Since it says in the Torah 40 times the word malacha, whereby malachis, that's why the number is 40 malacha. If so, it should be 40. Why only 39? In the Torah it says 40 times labor. We say the Torah, we don't mean scripture, we mean only the 5 books of Moses. And why only 39? Is because there are really 40 labors, but one of the 40 is permitted on Shabbos. The sum totality of work is really 40, not 39. That's why the Torah says 40 times work, because there are 40 types of original forms of labor, creative labor in the world. 39 of them are forbidden, one is permitted. What is that? So the Medrash says, it says that on Shabbos God rested from his work. Hashem rested from the work of the world, of his world. God did not rest, the Midrash says, from the work of the saint of the tzaddikim, of the righteous. What does that mean? I know. Melech Shamayim, the work of heaven. Avidasam Shel Yisrael, which represents the work of Israel. Shenekram Achas Yanasi. The one work that's permitted, the Achas, Malacha Achas, the one work, is the work that's associated with the entity called Achas. Who's Achas? The tzaddikim and all of Israel, which are V'amech Kulam tzaddikim. It's the work of Israel. What does that mean? Well, there's something that brings tremendous. It's a creative labor. What's called a work that's forbidden on Shabbos? Only creative labor. You're allowed to schlep boxes up and down the stairs on Shabbos. It could be a rabbinic prohibition because it looks it's weekday-ish, but it's not a prohibition. Sweating and exerting yourself is not what makes it. It's not one of the labors. It's only creative work. So, planting something is creative. You're making a change. Plowing the ground, you're making the soil now fertile, enabling it to. That's a creative labor. Building a structure, a creative labor. Sowing, a creative labor. Writing, a creative labor. Giving all examples of creative. Making a fire, a creative labor. You're creating something. These are all the creative labors that are. Well, there's something else that's very creative. Doing a mitzvah and learning Torah is awesomely creative. It brings a whole new light to the world. Yet it's permitted on Shabbos. So the 40th one, all other creative labor is forbidden, but the 40th one, what's that? That's called Malachtan Shel Tzadikim, the work of the Tzadikim, of the righteous, which is Amech Kulam Tzadikim. The Malacha Achas, the one work, that's permitted. The Adla Shleimas Avodah, Mitzad B'chinas Achas Yechidah Shebenefesh. Especially the real achas that it says it's permitted, the Malechas Achas, the Rebbe says, is the work, not just work of the Jewish people in this world, but the work that's coming from the deepest point of our soul, that's called achas, which means the contribution of the deepest inner point of our soul that brings something into the world that is so high and so immer. That's the real achas that is permitted on Shabbos. Okay, beer in you. What does that mean? So there's 39 that are forbidden, and the 40th is permitted, and that's why the Mishnah says 40 minus 1. So we're counting all 40, but then we're subtracting 1. Or beer in you. The explanation of the matter is the 39 types of labor include all the matters of the world. All elements of what we call weekday work, mundane improvements to the world. Every type of innovation, every type of contribution to the improvement of the world is one of the 39 labors. Now, through this that we work with the world, through the 39, in the 6 days of creation, the 6 days, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, the labor is permitted. Not just for non-Jews, for Jews as well. Because Jews participate in the improvement of the world. As a matter of fact, the Jewish people are of the most creative people in all of history in terms of inventing and innovation and bringing in new improvements to the world. If you would just, if we do a little evaluation of how much of the improvements of the world, where the world is today, was invented by Jewish scientists, and it's mind-blowing how such a minority makes such a big contribution to the world. But in any case, so that's during the week. But especially the right way of doing it, the desirable way of doing it, is that it should be all done for the sake of heaven, to improve God's world. And in all your ways you should know Him. Which means that when any type of work is done, it's done with the intention, with the godly intention of whatever goodness this is going to bring. So through doing that, what happens? All of this brings about a certain refinement in the world. As we learned many times, the world as the world has been created initially, or the way it is definitely after the sin of the tree of knowledge and so on and so forth, is that it's lacking refinement. It's obscuring, it's hiding, it's dark, it's not godly. The work of the improvement of the world, which includes all the labors that are done, all of that is supposed to refine the planet a little, make it more see-through, make it more, make the world less opaque, more transparent to godliness. The 39 types of work of mundane, which we're only allowed to do during the week. What he's saying is like this, very interesting. We gave earlier 2 sources for 39 work, that 39 things are the amount of labors. One of them is from the work of the Mishkan. These are the things that God said. We said, Ela Hadvarim is Gematria 39. And then we said also, because it says work 40 times. They got the number 3940. But what are the 39 labors? So the sages know 39, but how do they define exactly what those 39 labors are? The definitions of those 39 labors were whatever was used the types of labor that was used in constructing the tabernacle. Those were the 39 labors, and whatever, like for example, the sages found that when they built the tabernacle, they did writing. They marked certain things. When they built the temple, they did sewing. They did weaving. They did shearing the animals for the wool. They did dyeing, which is one of the labors. They made fire. All these things they built, was building. They carried. They were carrying from domain to domain. All the different labors that were done. So we look, the prototype was the building, constructing the tabernacle, entailed within itself every type of construction that there is in essence. The seeds, the core ideas of a construction. From there we learn out, these are the things you're not allowed to do on Shabbos. But here we learn out something else. That what is the content of the 39 labors when we're not building a tabernacle? We're not building the tabernacle. What are we doing now? Everybody in their daily activity. Everybody goes to work. One guy is a painter, the other one is a shoemaker, the other one is a tailor, the other one is an accountant, the other one is a doctor, the other one is a lawyer, the other one is a roofer. Everybody's doing all different types of labor. The content of all those labors is the 39 work to make a Mishkan. Why? Because really, what are we all engaged? All the Jewish people all over the world, over the last 6,000 years, we're constructing a Mishkan. We're making the entire world be a Mishkan for God. So really, this is very deep. All the 39 labors that we say that during the weekday you're allowed to, Shabbos you're not allowed to, but during the weekday you're allowed to. Where do we know what those 39 labors are? What was constructive in the temple? What does that mean? That really all the work that the Torah not only permits, but the Torah encourages us to do during the week. It's because through that we are constructing and making the world its godly place that it's going to be in the days of Mashiach. Fine. And what does that mean? We take physical elements in this world and we're making them into a Mishkan. We're making them into a home for God. Eventually we're going to see how the entire world is a home for God. Right? Like it says, make for me a temple, I will dwell amongst them. Eventually in the entire world. And through this, we affect the world and we complete the world with all 40 types of labor. What does that mean? Even though we're only doing 39. What does that mean? In addition to all the labors that we're all doing during the week, everybody in their department, what happens in the end? What happens in the very end? Oh, wait. And included in that is also mitzvahs. Torah, mitzvot that we do. All of that together shapes the world up for God. But including in those 39 is also the 40th. What's the 40th? The one you're allowed to do on Shabbos. So let's see. And more in general. This is the difference between exile and redemption. Choil v'Shabbos, weekday and Shabbos. Shagolus nikra malacha. Exile in general is called work. Like it says. In other words, when we measure up the exile to the redemption, exile is called weekday, and the redemption is called Shabbos. Therefore, in the time of exile is the time that we're doing the work. What's the work? The work is the repair that we do in making the world a better place. the improvements that we're doing to the world. Where do we find that? When Yaakov and Esau, Jacob and Esau meet, and Esau says to him, come have a barbecue, come to my house, I prepared, I would like to have a July 4th barbecue with you. Come visit me at Mount Seir. Jacob says to him, no, you go ahead. I have a big family, I have a lot of flock, sheep. I can't keep up with your pace. You go ahead, I'm going to move slowly in accordance to l'regel, according to the pace of the work that I need to do. So even though he meant simply, I'm going to arrive to you, and it's going to take you, you're going to be back at your place in 3 days. It's going to take me 3 weeks to get there. But eventually I'm going to get to you. That's a simple meaning. There's a much deeper meaning yet. Yaakov says to Esau, I have 3,000 years of labor ahead of me till we're ready to meet again, me and you. Till Netanyahu and Trump can meet again in the White House, which is happening today. But there's 3,000 years of toil and labor that we have to refine the world, that ultimately Jacob and Esau should meet again. But then the world will be ready for redemption. There's a long path. What does Yaakov refer to that period? L'regel hamalacha, the work. Because once Yaakov will reach Esau, once Yaakov will go visit Esau in Har Edom, once Mashiach is here, then what we call now malacha won't exist anymore. It's going to be Shabbos. Shabbos, you don't do work. Okay. The exile is the time of the 39 types of work, which spiritually, according to the Arizal, as we learn, it's the 288 sparks that we're busy fixing, that have fallen. Through all of our collective labor, through all these years of exile, eventually is the revelation of Shabbos. Yom Shekulei Shabbos, it's going to be Shabbos. Then we will reach the 40th one. Malacha Achas will be the final labor. The one that's permitted in the days of Mashiach. Moving, it's understood. Okay. So what is he really saying over here? Let's try to make sense of what he's saying here. That there's a symbiosis between Shabbos and the weekday. It's not like, okay, Shabbos, you're not allowed to work, weekdays you're working. What you're working during the week is only prepares for the ultimate, for the 40th. Now, Shabbos is the zenith of a perfect world. The world reaches its ultimate state of perfection. In the ultimate state of perfection, it's crowned with the last labor, the 40th. But in order to get to the 40th, you need to do 39 types of work, of improvements, which eventually then you can come and put the cherry on the top, which is the 40th malacha, which represents the ultimate final piece, if you might say, of everything. So in our small little Shabbos, which means in our weekly Shabbos, week and Shabbos, which means in the small unit of 6 days and Shabbos, 39 types of work we do during the week, and Shabbos, we're not allowed to do those 39 types of work, but we're allowed to do the 40th, which is study Torah and do mitzvahs. And the sages purposely say that what you're not allowed during the week, what you're not allowed to do on Shabbat is 40 minus 1. Because they want to illustrate that what we are doing on Shabbos is actually crowning all the 39 things. On Shabbos, you're not allowed to do those 39. Because Shabbos, you're already rising to the perfection. But it's not like it's two different realities. It's one perfection, which comes through the labors of the 39 during the week. It's perfected because, again, because the Torah, if the Torah says 40 times the word malacha, means that what does it take to make a perfect world? And what's the perfect world? A world that's a home for God, not 39, 40. 39 of them you're not allowed to do on Shabbos. The 40th, you do primarily on Shabbos. You learn Torah and you do mitzvot. And that's the 40th. But that saturates whatever you did during the week. The 39 work that you did during the week, the 40th is only the 40th if you had 39. If you didn't have 39, then you don't have the 40th. It has to be the 40th. So it creates it's one unit. And just like it is every Shabbos, the 39 labors of the week are complemented by the 40th and reach its perfection on Shabbos. The same is also in general force of time. The 6 millennia, and primarily from when the Torah was given, the last 3,500 years, is considered all the 39 labors. The time in which we're doing the malacha, the 39 labors. And when Mashiach comes, no more of those work, but then it's complemented by the 40th, which is the Shabbos of time. We'll move on, it's understood. So now he says that on the 40th year of the previous Rebbe's leadership, this is emphasized stronger, that we're holding in the 40th, that we're holding in the crown, we're holding at the crown jewel of that perfection. Okay. And based on this, we can also explain. So we explained why the Mishnah says 40 minus 1, that we explained. But why this order? First sowing and then plowing. And why does it use carrying from one domain to the final to another domain as the final malacha, not the bang with the hammer? So let's see. He begins with sowing. By taking out from one rishus to the other rishus. Because at the beginning of the list and at the end of the list, it is highlighting and emphasizing the general content of what this unit of labors are all about. In other words, by looking at the beginning and looking at the end, it summarizes. It's like when you want to give something over to somebody that they should understand. It helps a lot if in the beginning you give a little summary of what you're going to teach. In other words, you say the main point, you give what you call an overview, and in the end you do a summary in which you conclude everything. Which is in the beginning and the end you get the whole picture. In the middle you just hear the details. That's why in the 39 labors, when the Mishnah is going to list to us the 39 labors, the Mishnah is choosing a particular one at the beginning and a particular one at the end, because these two emphasize what the general idea of all this work is. So it's not like the Mishnah is just telling you, okay, 39 work you're now allowed to do on Shabbos, you can do them during the week. It's trying to tell you, what is it really all about? Why are you working during the week? What's the purpose of that? You're bringing the ultimate perfection to God's world. What is that? Let's see what the first one is. You're planting. So what does that mean? And since the 39 labors are what? Primarily during the time of exile, we said earlier. It comes out that the first and last malacha is giving us an understanding of what the exile is all about. The Zman HaBitter, which is the time in which we're doing the 39 types of work in the world. Hazireya, what does it mean? Sowing, kiyadua, it is known, sheklolusing in agolus nimshal is real. We know that the general exile is called a planting. God takes the Jewish people. When we were living in Israel, we were not having the right impact on the entire world because we were all far from the rest of civilization. So God took the Jewish people and planted them. First of all, he planted us over 3,000 years, period. Sprinkled some in every generation. And God plants Jews everywhere across the world. So to certain anti-Semites, it's to annoy the hell out of everybody. The anti-Semites. But the true reason for that is not to annoy anybody. It's to elevate the world and to refine the world and to bring a transformation in the world. I'm going to read to you something very spectacular. I'm sure some of you saw this, but those who didn't see this, it's so worth reading it. It's out of the world special. So there's a fellow by the name of Alistair Heath. He's a British journalist for the Daily Telegraph. This is what he writes. He says there's something special about Israel that makes people uncomfortable. And it's not what they say it is. They'll point to politics, settlements, borders, and wars. But scratch beneath the outrage and you'll find something deeper. A discomfort not with what Israel does, but with what Israel is. A nation this small should not be this strong, period. Israel has no oil, no special natural resources, a population barely the size of a mid-sized American city. They are surrounded by enemies, hated in the United Nations, targeted by terror, condemned by celebrities, boycotted, slandered, and attacked. And still, they thrive like there's no tomorrow in military, in medicine, in security, in technology, in agriculture, in intelligence, in morality, in sheer unbreakable will. They turn desert into farmland. They make water from air. They intercept rockets in mid-air. They rescue hostages under the nose of the world's worst regimes. They survive wars that were supposed to wipe them out and win. The world watches this and can't make sense of it. So they do what people do when they witness strength they can't understand. They assume it must be cheating. It must be American aid. It must be foreign lobbying. It must be oppression. It must be theft. It must be some dark trick that gave the Jews this kind of power. It must be blackmail. Because heaven forbid it's something else. Heaven forbid it's real. Heaven forbid it's earned. Or worse, destined. The Jewish people were supposed to disappear a long time ago. That's how the story of exiled, enslaved, hated minorities is supposed to end. But the Jews didn't disappear. They actually came home, rebuilt their land, revived their language, and brought their dead back to life. In memory, in identity, and in strength. That's not normal. It's not political. It's biblical. There is no cheat code that explains how a group of people returned to their homeland after 2,000 years. There is no rational path from gas chambers to global influence. And there is no historical precedent for surviving the Babylonians, the Romans, the Crusaders, the Inquisition, the pogroms, and the Holocaust, and still showing up to work on Monday in Tel Aviv. Israel doesn't make sense unless you believe in something beyond the math. That is what drives the world crazy. Because if Israel is real, if this improbable, ancient, hated nation is somehow still chosen, protected, and thriving, then maybe God isn't a myth after all. Maybe he's still he's still in the story. Maybe history isn't random. Maybe evil doesn't get the last word. Maybe the Jews are not just a people, but a testimony. That's what they can't stand. Because once you admit that Israel's survival isn't just impressive, but divine, everything changes. Your moral compass has to reset. Your assumptions about history, power, and justice collapse. You realize you're not watching the end of an empire, you're witnessing the beginning of something eternal. So they deny it, they smear it, and rage against it, because it's easier to call a miracle cheating than to face the possibility that God keeps his promises. This is a British journalist. That's the whole story. That's what you're watching. That's what you're watching is driving the entire world mad right now, because today it's being seen by everybody. And every day it's being seen more and more. So back to what the Sikha is saying, that's why exile is called a planting, because God took his people and scatters them and plants them like seeds around the entire world under oppressive regimes, under every type of circumstance that's supposed to make us disappear. And against all the cards stacked against them, against all predictions, and against all possibilities of a natural course, the Jewish people come out ahead and change the consciousness of the entire world. So that's like you're planting seeds, the seeds rot, but then suddenly it comes back. What God is planting when he's planting the Jews in exile is he's planting himself everywhere, the consciousness of God everywhere. And that sprouts everywhere. What do you think people in Melbourne last week went and lit a synagogue on a fire and tried to, and attacked little 7-year-old girls in Sydney, and say Heil Hitler to 7-year-old girls going to school? Why? In Melbourne and in New York City and in Chicago and in South Africa and in, why? The world does not want to face the truth that the Jewish people are declaring loud. The Jews don't even have to say anything. God says about the Jewish people, you are my testimony. Atem edai. You are testimony that I exist. We don't have to say anything, and we're declaring God's truth. Some people applaud and go crazy, and they're in awe when they see us. Others go mad with rage. But everybody has to react to our existence. No one can remain indifferent. You can choose your side. Everybody in the entire world, I keep on saying this, right now is in the ballot box. They're voting yeah or no to God. And that vote is being expressed in their support for the Jew or in the rejection of the Jew. And this is the ultimate test for humanity. Right now, you're watching it. It's so amazing. But the way this British journalist put this down is just absolutely spectacular. So let's go back to the Rebbe. 39 malachis. Azareya, like it says, the general idea of exile is compared to a planting. I've planted them in the earth. So that's why does the 39 types of work, which represent the time of fixing the world, for it to become a home for God, starts with planting. Because the general planting, sowing, because by sowing, it looks like you're destroying your seeds when you're doing it. If a person doesn't understand planting, it looks like you're taking something and literally utterly destroying it, because it's going to rot in the ground. But come back a few months later, What you're going to see is going to be nothing short of a miracle. So when God takes the Jewish people and puts them into exile, scatters them across the world, it looks like he is destroying the one nation that he has that believe in him, that brought monotheism in the world, the nation of Abraham. It looks like he's destroying it. What are you doing? And God says, come back in a couple of months. You'll watch what I planted and destroyed come back with enormous dividends. It'll bring the entire world to me. It'll come back with, I'm scattering 1 million people. It's going to bring back 8 billion. Some of them happy, others stomping their feet, angry that the Jewish people reminded them of God. But everybody's coming back to God through Israel. And that's why the Mishnah in Masechta Shabbos, when it talks about the work of the exile, introducing the 39 types of labors, which, as we said before, is the era of exile. It begins with the one labor that most expresses what the exile is supposed to be. Brilliant teaching of the Rebbe, of why Zareya is the first. What's the last one? Hamoitzim rishus l'shus. If you're taking from one domain to another domain. Sharei klolos inyan agolos. What is the exile? God took the Jewish people from one domain, from the land of Israel, sitting next to him, and he brings them out to the public domain. He scatters them amongst the masses of people across the entire world. Banim shagalum al shilcham aviyam. The children that were expelled from their father's table. That's the content of taking something from a private domain into a public domain, which is the prohibition on Shabbat of doing that. But during the weekday, that's called carrying. God had the Jewish people next to him, and God put them out amongst the places in the world that don't know him yet. Which is called another domain. What does that mean? A domain that does not acknowledge God. A domain that just believes in nature, not in God. And believes in the survival of the fittest and not in God. And that is going to be challenged by the Jewish people being there. That's the idea, that's the summary of all of exile. Zman Abirur, that's the time of the purification, Shalametes Malachis, of all 39 work. Gam Mamaka Bepatish, also the hammer that's hit in the end. It's all part of the 39, but it's these type of 2 work. It's the planting and carrying out from one domain that most summarize what the exile is. Now, that is true about what God did when he sent the Jewish people to exile. How about what we do? Israel, the Jewish people, what do we do? Our work during the exile is also planting and carrying from one domain to another domain. Why is that? Because in addition to God planting Israel, the Jewish people, across the world, to every country and to every place, we, the Jewish people, are also planting. We're putting seeds of mitzvot across the entire world. Every time we do a mitzvah, especially when we construct something holy in the lands of the Gentile. When a Jew makes a ritual bathhouse, which is called a mikvah, which is the fulfillment of God's will. When a Jew builds a synagogue, or when we construct anything else, a school that teaches Torah, these are all plantings across the entire globe, everywhere. And every little mitzvah, smallest little mitzvah, lighting one Shabbat candle in one corner of the world is a seed. We don't see its light now, but it's going to shine with infinite godly light when Mashiach comes in that corner of the planet, far, far away. the refinement of these 39 types of work. So what is that? Hazoreya, the planting. Zriya din yanei Torah mitzvahs. When we're doing a mitzvah, it's called planting seeds. Kamashakasav, like it says, Ziru lachem litzdaka, plant tzedakah. That's one. What's the other one? Taking from one domain to the into another domain. By the Jewish people, it's the opposite. God takes the Jewish people from the private domain and scatters them into the public domain. And our job is to transport everything from the public domain back into the private domain. Because what we do, what Israel is supposed to do, is to take every piece, every object, every person, every creation that exists in the world, that at this point is not acknowledging God. That means it's living in the public domain. Public means a place owned by many, which means a place that doesn't recognize God's authority. It's owned by many. Elections will decide whether we'll have the 10 commandments or not. And if the people decide, we don't want to acknowledge God, then we won't acknowledge God. It's being ruled by the majority. So the Jews silently chip away at that. And as a result of the mitzvot and good deeds that we do, we kind of compel in a very hidden, non-combative way, but compel the world to come to a godly consciousness and a recognition of one God. That's the direct influence of the Jewish people on the world. That eventually, the dollar bill, which is the most powerful currency in the world, which everything in the world runs on, the dollar bill has God's staple on it. In God we trust. It's an American dollar bill. But the only reason it's written on the American dollar is because of the tenets and the teachings of Judaism, which made its way onto every dollar bill. That means taking the public domain and pulling it into every transaction think about it, every transaction in the world, not every, but the dollars is so much of the transactions in the world. Every transaction has God's name imbued in it, whether people are acknowledging. But you understand, it's creating a certain Wi-Fi frequency that are going into people's consciousness, whether they know it or not, because they're making an exchange on dollars. They're buying on Amazon with dollars. They're not necessarily holding the dollar, but it's a dollar that is being exchanged. And that's influencing the world on the deepest level. It's all bringing things we're carrying things from the public into the private. What is the final bang of the hammer of all the work? What does that mean? Understand what the Rebbe is saying over here. Now, he's saying, initially, just like the planting is initially the work of carrying works the opposite. Because work in general, what's work? Initially, all the materials of the world. If you take a look at a raw world that no one touched. It's God's world. It's an untouched world. What happens when people started developing the world? What happens? People start claiming ownership on these things. I took it. I made it mine. I took a tree. I cut the tree down. and I made I made a rowboat, or whatever they used to have those. And through that I go fishing, and I grab the fish that are God's fish, and now I'm taking it and I'm using, because one of the malachas of Shabbos is actually trapping animals or fishing fish. So what are you doing? You're actually pulling it from the private domain, from God's world, into yours. You're building yourself a house. When the stones were part of the mountain, it was God's. Now you're taking it, you're making it yours, your home. So in a sense, the initial work that is being done, the content of work in the world, unrelated to the Jewish people, the content of work itself, the labors of the world of developing things, is really taking things from being in the oneness and fragmenting it and pulling it into everybody, into their own grabbing pieces of it. Then comes a deeper work, which was when Israel gets scattered in the world, and the work the Jewish people are supposed to do is to take it back from the public domain back into the private domain, back into the oneness. Because he threw me off over here when he said Haitzah Mershus L'Shus, is Haitzah taking it Mershus Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, from God's Rishus, Rishus HaYachad, which is private, Yechidah Shel Olam, which is the singular one of the world, L'Rishus HaRabim, you're taking it out to the public domain, Alma de Pruda, the world of separation, which went totally the opposite of what I was saying earlier. But that's what he's adding over here. Now comes the 39 types of work that we do during the time of exile. We come to the ultimate redemption. Then we get to see, then it's revealed what has been gained through the sowing, through the planting. Until you can also see the gain of God taking his children and putting him out from one domain to the other domain, and also of the fashioning of all the parts of this world to become exiting the oneness. But what's the point of it? To come to a deeper oneness. After the world is developed, everything goes back to one. So let's see. When you're planting seeds, what happens? From one seed that you planted comes back a whole lot of grain. One seed. Or you plant one grape seed. You get a whole vine. With a lot of branches. I know, what does that mean? The descent into the exile is in order for it to bring a tremendous growth, which is way beyond what we had before. And taking out from one domain to the other domain. L'malyusa, in the positive way, means you're taking it back from the public, back into the private. The entire world, the entire world becomes a singular domain, the Yechidah Shel Olam, to the singular one, which is God. God has a home in this lower world. Beginning with Gulasam Shel Yisrael. How does the opposite? First Haitzah means carrying. The initial one that God did 2,000 years ago is he took the Jewish people out of a place of oneness, put us into the public domain. But the final Haitzah is going to be to take them out from all the nations in the world and bring them back to the land of Israel. From a foreign place, returning to their father's table. Haitzah Gemura, it's a complete pulling out. Al Yedei, because we know that in the laws of Haitzah, the laws of carrying, you're only liable on Shabbat. It's only considered if you completely uprooted it from one place and put it down in another place. If you didn't completely uproot, it's not considered a carrying. So what does that mean in the spiritual meaning? Is that God has to completely uproot the Jewish people from the exile state and plant them completely in Israel. Va'anocha b'shleimusa be'eretz Yisrael. Kol yoshvei Allah, that everybody is in the land of Israel, kipshutei mamish, in the literal sense. Not just spiritually, but in the material he brings over here. The Nimtza comes out, Shebeperek Shvi'i, the Masechta Shabbos, in the 7th chapter of Masechta Shabbos, Mudgish Inyan HaGeula, this emphasizes the redemption. U'ba'ofen the Klal Gadol, the Mishnah says, a great principle is said by Shabbos. This great principle is basically, according to the Rebbe's, the way the Rebbe learns this Mishnah, is a great principle regarding the entire 39 work, which means the entire labor of exile is stated in the Masechta Shabbos in the 7th chapter, which is because only at the time of the redemption can you look back and have vision what happened in the last 2,000 years. You don't get to see it in the interim. You only get to see it at the end. So the Rebbe says in the Masechta Tractate Shabbos, in the 7th chapter, which 7 is redemption, is it gives you an overall, a bird's eye view of 2,000 years of history. Hein b'negei lebnei Yisrael, whether the Jewish people, lo yira geula shel prat, not only the redemption of an individual, or yafil a klal gadol, or a community, or klal stam, or a general group, el klal gadol, because the redemption is going to incorporate every single Jew. That's what's called klal gadol. It's everybody. She'ein l'mayna memena, kol b'nei Yisrael, without the exception even of one. No one, let's understand something, not one Jew is going to escape the loving hand of Mashiach. No one is going to be able to wiggle their way out of the redemption. That's regarding the Jewish people themselves. But it's also affecting the work of the Jewish people on the world. What's the work of the Jewish people on the world? Shapa'ula, that the effect on the Jewish people is b'chol inyanei ha'olam, affects every element of the world. Like he said, this British journalist, in medicine, in politics, in all kinds of other scientific innovation in it, but primarily every element of the world will have been influenced to include that too into the unity of God. There won't be one area of life that will not have been impacted by the Torah and the mitzvot that the Jewish people did during the time of exile. Because the 39 types of labors hit every angle of creation. There's not one era, there's not one avenue of life that is not targeted in these 39 types of work. Until you get to the farthest places, Rishus HaRabim, the places that are the most public of domain, the places that you would the least expect, people that you would the least expect for them to be drawn into the unity, and yet they too are drawn into the unity. Because the reach of Israel and the Jewish people is to everybody. And how do you know? Take a look. You see everybody gets upset at them. If you take a look and see how like people have no reason to have anything to do, and yet they're marching and they're screaming and why? It's because everybody senses the hook. There is a hook that has been placed in everybody's gut. A Jewish hook. Where is it pulling all of humanity and all of existence? Everybody. There isn't a race, there aren't a people, there aren't a religion, there aren't a nation, there aren't a country, there isn't a place that has not been yet like kind of like where something has not been placed into its innards to pull it towards the ultimate oneness of God. Everybody is included. And as every day passes, it's becoming more obvious and more obvious. You can literally sit and watch it happening. Take a look at how much the UN can't stand it. And the UN are the representative of all the nations in the world. They're fixated only on Israel. You know why? Because Israel put a hook inside the digestive tract of every single person across the entire world that is becoming informed of the all-embracing and absolute truth of God. And either you turn around and you embrace it and love it, or you're being pulled kicking and screaming, but it doesn't help because everybody is being impacted by this. Because even in the farthest of places, the effect of Israel's work, I mean thousands of years of observance, are beginning to show their fruits, are beginning now to sprout. And every human feels it. And what is it doing it? It's taking him out from the public domain to the private domain. It's making it harder to ignore God. L'malyusa, in the positive, Meshusa Rabim l'Reshusa Yachid, from the public domain to the private domain. The Yechidah Shaloylam Ka'amar, like we said earlier, Dir Allah Yizbarach B'Tachtayim. God is going to have His home in this lowest world, in the heart and soul of every single human and every single creature in the entire universe. The Indians and this idea. This idea that the redemption is impacting the effects on every creature, on the entire world, we see that on the 12th day of Tamuz. That's where the Rebbe is going at this. He's going to show that the same flavor and the same idea you see because who is this all being driven by? The nucleus of the Jewish people. The nucleus of the Jewish people is Mashiach. That's the grand finale of it all. Since the previous Rebbe's redemption is the beginning of the redemption of Mashiach, so his redemption had to have all the evidence, all the characteristics of the final redemption. Where do you see the characteristics of the final redemption? In the redemption of the 12th day of Tamuz. Now let's read it. Chag HaGeula, the Yom Tov of the redemption, good. Nikva l'shnei yamim, was instituted for 2 days. Yud Beis v'Yud Gimel Tamuz, the 12th and the 13th day of Tamuz. Ki b'Yud Beis Tamuz oiserak b'sudas HaGeula. Like we said earlier, on the 12th of Tamuz there was only the notification of the redemption. We're still not handed the papers in a revealed way. Since on the 12th day of Tammuz, it was a legal holiday. And the office, the government office, was closed according to the laws of the USSR. Government offices are closed for business on this day. Only tomorrow, B'Yud Gimel Tammuz, on the 13th of Tammuz, then he was able to receive his papers openly and be liberated. And here's the great question the Rebbe asks, and only the Rebbe will ask such a question, and only the Rebbe will answer, because only he has this insight to reveal something so precious. We need to understand, even since everything in the world, everything in the world is by divine providence, especially the redemption of the leader of the generation. And Bashgacha Pratis is all by divine providence. Lama asa Hashem kacha. Why did God do this? Shachayfis yisakif yoim noisef. That the liberation of the previous Rebbe should be held back an extra day, because the USSR has a rule that offices is closed. So much so that this impacts that every year when we make the holiday, we have 2 days. So we remember this idea. So imagine something like this. God has been planning this day for a long time, right? Because this is a highlight. This is the Jewish people. This is the leader of the Jewish people who is fighting to keep Judaism alive. And God wants to give the previous Rebbe a birthday present. Because it was his birthday. On the day of his birthday, he was freed. So God is like planning this surprise party like for a very long time. Imagine that it comes the moment that it has to happen, and we're ready to do the delivery and ready to like kind of pop the champagne and shoot and like shoot the fireworks. Previous Rebbe, you're released. You can go out. And God takes a look and he says, oh, office is closed. These Russians. Shame I didn't think about this earlier. I should have, like, why did I make the world in a way that the Soviets are going to make that day? I couldn't. And God says, if I only would have thought of this, I would have arranged a calendar that they should have their legal holiday should fall out a day before. What a mess. Okay, we have no choice, God says to the angels. We got to wait till tomorrow. Does that make any sense? Obviously, God knows everything in advance. And God purposely made that the redemption of the leader of the Jewish people, which is utterly miraculous, should come out on a day that he can't get his papers on that day, and he's going to have to wait till tomorrow until the office is open. You know why? Because that's the whole point of the redemption. The whole point of the redemption is that it has to come with the participation of the USSR. They need to redeem him with their laws. God doesn't want to break any rules of the country. He wants the country with their rules, in accordance to their rules, to let him out. Why? Because that tells you what this redemption is. The redemption is the elevation of humanity with all of its rules and all of its regulations into godliness. Not a shattering of anything. God doesn't want to break even one lock. He wants everything in the world to find its way into divine cooperation. I'm purposely not breaking the door. That's Mashiach. Mashiach doesn't shatter anything. Mashiach is keeping the world exactly, every piece in it, but everything just opens up to godly consciousness, and everything participates with God's will. The redemption from Egypt was God kicking down the doors, breaking the world. For that, we didn't need 3,000 years of exile and to demolish the world, because God wants and he overrides the world. That's not the point. The point is the very governments, and a government is a government, and a government has to have rules. And you see, ultimately, even when Russia was dismantled, when the USSR was completely dismantled, they themselves dismantled it. It wasn't like some prophet came on a mountain or some army came on the outside and disassembled this USSR. They themselves imploded their own government. They themselves undid it. Because it was not a kosher government. Because it was a government based on atheism. But God did it in a way that they themselves, it was without a war in 1990. The Russians themselves undid their own evil. This is so deep. And it all begins with the previous Rebbe coming out and waiting. He's not forcing anything. Let them give him his papers when their office is open according to the law. Because if you're going to override the law, it means that the law didn't participate. The law has to participate, which means the Congress has to, the Russian, I don't know, whatever they have, the Kremlin has to participate with their laws. That's what makes it messianic. We weren't spending here thousands of years in the world so that we can break it in the end. You ever have a situation where you're trying to like fix something and you're working, you can't do it, and then you get so frustrated you just break it and you take the piece that you need or whatever it is because you just broke it. But you feel good? You feel like a total loser. You ever try to get into a room and you can't get in because the lock is got stuck, and you're working and working trying to find the key, or you're trying to meddle and tricks and this and that, and then in the end you can't. You need to get something. So after hours of working, frustration, you go and you bust the whole thing, and you take it out. You feel like a real loser because you broke it. That's for that you could have done that 5 hours ago to break it. God wants to break the world and make it godly. He could have done that 3,000 years ago with Moses. He doesn't want that. He wants us to delicately repair it, to delicately elevate it. That's Mashiach. So when the whole messianic process begins on the 12th of Tamuz in 1927, by the leader of the Jewish people, who will lead the Jewish people, who will pave the way for the next leader, who's going to bring the redemption to the entire world. And it's the next leader who actually explains this very idea, is without any busting any offices, without anything. It's done in a way where God purposely makes it have to be delayed because we got to get the world to work. You got to work with the world. You got to work with the world. And it applies to us as well. We don't destroy our bodies. We got to work with our bodies. We got to work with each other. It's so powerful. We're going to understand it. Shaila Digmasa, the Rebbe doesn't get to the answer yet. I jumped ahead and gave you the answer, which the Rebbe says. But he says we'll understand this by first understanding another redemption that happened with the previous Rebbe's predecessor, the Alter Rebbe, Shneur Zalman of Liadi, who was also, the first Chabad Rebbe, was also incarcerated, not by the Soviets, but by the Tsar in Russia, with all kinds of libels against the Hasidic movement that he introduced. So when the Alter Rebbe finally was released from jail, after he stood in front of the Tsar's Senate, or whatever it was, and proved his innocence, and completely decimated or dissolved all the libels that were made up, and he showed that how it was all false. After these were released, he went and he wrote a letter to a colleague of his, a great Hasidic Rebbe, Reb Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev. He also sent this letter to the great Reb Baruch, the grandson of the Baal Shem Tov, two of the great Hasidic Rebbes. And the Alter Rebbe writes there in his letter as follows: that he writes that this is a day that God did such wonders to me and I was redeemed. By the way, there as well, it was very unlikely because anybody he was accused of the highest, it was all libels, but they accused him of the highest crime in Russia and any country of treason. They arrested him like the worst political criminal under the most severe security. Took him in a black wagon. It was like a very, very severe offense. He was redeemed. The 19th of Kislev is another holiday in Chabad. So the Alter Rebbe writes a letter to his friends, the other Hasidic Rebbes, and he writes about the great miracles that happened. And he says, that his redemption was ba'ofen, Shehifla Hashem, the words of the Alter Rebbe, that God did wonders, the Higdal, and he did something great, Lasis ba'aretz, to do something awesome in the land, that he did it, befrat be'einei kol asadim v'chol ha'amim, that he made it in a way that the great ministers and in front of the people, all publicly in front of all the ministers, and asher b'chol medinai samelech, that are in all the king's provinces, talking about the great Russian Empire, that they all declared, when they saw what happened, they said, wow, this is like, no one expected that outcome. They were shocked. The L'chura ain't a move, and it's not understood. We know that the 19th of Kislev, the redemption of Reb Shneur Zalman of Liadi, was something so elevated, so high. We know it's Rosh Hashanah leChasidus. It's considered the beginning of the year for the teachings of Chasidus. And this was the opening salvo, the opening to start doing the work of spreading the Chasidus to bring Mashiach. So it was something very, very high, sublime, spiritual. A great light was revealed to the Jewish people. If we're talking about something so lofty and holy and spiritual, why emphasize something that seems to be so trivial that Count so-and-so was impressed and Prince so-and-so was it, and whatever they are, the various different ministers and this were like, wow, they were talking about it. Who cares? Who cares what the ministers in Russia were saying? The main thing is we have now the diamond of the king. We have the deepest teachings of Torah. They're not stopping us. We're able to teach it. That's what should have been emphasized. What is he talking about? Seems to be something so insignificant. Why does he emphasize the impression that it made on the Gentiles? That the people heard of it. It was written in the newspapers and people were saying, wow, basically the Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe is emphasizing that it made it to the headlines of the Washington Post. Is that so important? The explanation is as follows. You're right. If this was just about the Jewish people, and if this was just about a redemption of a great rabbi and of a great teaching of the Torah, then all of that wouldn't be important. If these redemptions were just something great that God does for a great rabbi and for a great tzaddik, it's worth celebrating, but it's an individual salvation that God gave for a certain person or for a certain part of Torah, then you're right. It would be silly to talk about its influence on the nations. But the Rebbe says, you're wearing the wrong glasses. The Alter Rebbe has nothing to do with just a great tzaddik and a great teaching. There is one story over here. The Alter Rebbe's redemption and the previous Rebbe's redemption, this is the coming of Mashiach. Do you understand? That's what the Rebbe is saying. This is the redemption since this is the redemption, so it's the redemption of the world. It's not the redemption just of a great tzaddik. It might have happened 250 years ago to the seed that was going to spread, but it's still the redemption of the world. And that's the reason why it had to reflect that this is the redemption of the world. When Mashiach will come, it will be on CNN and on the BBC and on Al Jazeera all day long. They'll be talking about it. It will impact every single human being on the planet. So these redemptions also have to inspire those that were in power, the political high echelons of those days. Because it is messianic. So it's not the story just of the Jewish people, or the story of a rabbi, or the story, a jubilation of a Hasidic movement. It is ultimate redemption. It's phase 1 of ultimate redemption. It's phase 2 of ultimate redemption. But it's all leading up and part of the ultimate redemption. That's what he's saying. Kivan shegulas elu, since these redemptions, the Yad Kislev, the Yud Beis, Yud Gimel Tamuz, of the 19th of Kislev and the 12th and 13th of Tamuz, Kshuris are bound up, imagula mitis vashlema, are bound up with the complete and absolute redemption. Sha'az yi'abir the chala olam kulay, which then the entire world will be refined. Kaidel gam umay sa'olam, including also the nations. Kamay shakasav azah hapachela amim. Like we say, then God says, I will convert the nations. La'avdai shchem echad, that they should all serve him together. Lchaim, therefore, madgishim eshechusam shel umes ha'olam legulas elu. That's why we emphasize the connection of the nations to these redemptions. Hashpa aleim, the influence on them. This gives a whole new understanding of why the big meeting of Netanyahu and Trump, which is regarding Israel and all its surrounding countries, Syria and Abraham Accords, and hopefully the complete eradication of Hamas and the release of the hostages and all of that, is taking place in Washington on the 12th of Tamuz and on the 13th of Tamuz. Because it's making sure that the nations in the world are in their best behavior and are being dominated by the will of Mashiach. And that they shouldn't even get out of line even a tiny bit to try to force Israel to any concessions that they shouldn't be doing. And that's the reason why I didn't have a class to teach today. I had nothing to teach. I was looking for stuff here and there, and I actually wasn't going to teach tonight. But some of my students arrived, and they were waiting for a class. So I grabbed the book off the shelf and I opened it up without preparing, and I'm teaching right now from that book. Because this had to be said tonight, right over here. The Rebbe is saying over here how these redemptions, the redemption that happens today, is part of influencing the nations of the world and dominating over the nations of the world. The influence on them, like the words of the Alter Rebbe, regarding his redemption on the 19th of Kislev, that God did wonders in the eyes of all the ministers, and all the nations. And the same is regarding the 12th day of Tamuz. It needed to be in a way, here as well. The Soviets themselves were stunned by them releasing their prisoner. You say to them as that, and on the 12th of Tammuz is even more. Not only was it publicized in the newspapers, that they all can see and witness the miracle. Even the official action to release him, not only that the higher government official, however that was, somewhere in the Kremlin, gave the green light that they should let the previous Rebbe out. Not only that, but the actual document, the stamp that was put, needed to happen in a way that it should be in accordance and recognized and enforced with the laws of the country. According to the laws of the country. How? And how would it be? You wouldn't notice this detail. You know how you notice this detail? God purposely made that his surprise birthday party that he did for the Friedrich Rebbe should not be so perfect. It's perfect, much more perfect, but it looks like it's not perfect because it's frustrating because he got the news that he's being released, but he can't go out until the next day because the offices are closed. Why would God do that? Because he wanted to show the previous Rebbe, and by showing him, to show the entire world that this redemption engages the world, doesn't override the world. It engages the world. It gets the world to participate. On this, that the things were held back to the 13th of Tammuz. Shabbat, what's the gain of the 13th? You wait until the public office, the government office, is open. You don't forcing it. Why couldn't the Kremlin call and say, listen, get the door open, and send one of the workers in, get the secretary in there, let her open up the office and get the prisoner out. Kremlin, and obviously the Kremlin, for whatever reason, wanted the Rebbe out. Maybe there was world pressure, which we know there was. Chabad organization made tremendous pressure, whatever it was. It was God's miracle, but the bottom line there was an outcry. And the Kremlin decided to let the Rebbe go. But why didn't they then send their secretary in? Because if they would do that last move on a day that they have to kind of break their own rule, their own law, it would not really be with the full participation of the. So it needed to be, no, you'll wait till tomorrow. It has to be open, business as usual. And in the setting of business as usual, they needed to acknowledge that the Rebbe deserves to be free. That means that the natural world is comfortable with God's will. There's no friction between the natural world and God's will. What is Mashiach? When nature itself is comfortable with God. Acknowledges and is perfectly in sync with God. It's not like there's tension. God's will and nature or whatever. No, everything is one. And when does that happen? On the 13th day of Tamuz. What's 13? Echad. Echad means there's only one. What one? That God, the singular one, is one with nature, with Ches and Dalet, which is all of time and space. That means the world and every country and every administration and every government is working in harmony with God. That's 13. That's why it's another deep. That's why that part happened on the 13th. The 12th doesn't emphasize that. 12th emphasizes 12 tribes of Israel. Doesn't engage the world. The 13th engages the world. The Rebbe says in footnote 74 that in the act, literally, the truth is, he says, the office was really open on the 12th as well. How do you know? Because the previous Rebbe was called to the office, and over there they gave him over that he's free. But maybe their typewriters were not set to work or whatever. The computers were shut. There was no computers. Whatever it was, they weren't allowed to do any official paperwork. So they told him to come back the next day. Such a minor detail, and the Rebbe reveals in this minor detail the deepest idea. That shows you how God in the world. Since the world was created, there was never a teacher who read in so much significance on what you might look at as such a silly little detail. The Rebbe is actually seeing the entire purpose of existence expressed in a little detail that they told him, come back tomorrow because tomorrow we can put the stamp and give you the official thing. Today we can't do it. And take a look at the depth. This is the idea that in every little detail is everything. In other words, if you're not familiar with the Rebbe's teaching, it almost looks childish. Say, Rebbe, come on. If you want to live in a world where everything is random and everything is meaningless, you might be able to live there for another few seconds. But in the ultimate reality that God is the reality of the world, everything has infinite significance. We're just not paying attention. And here you see that the Rebbe pays attention to the tiniest thing, but it shows you how in this tiny little thing lies the entire novelty of this redemption and why it's cosmic. And in footnote 75, he says the idea that I told you earlier. Now, Pizei Lchaim, based on this, we can say that on the 12th day of Tamuz is emphasized primarily the Geula regarding the Jewish people. And on the 13th, because it's 12 tribes, and on the 13th day of Tamuz is primarily emphasized the influence of the redemption regarding the nations in the world. Because 12 is the number of Israel. 13 represents oneness, God's ultimate oneness in all of creation. Okay. Be'inyan. And regarding this, the influence of the redemption on the eyes of all the ministers, there is a special novelty this year. When the Rebbe said in 1989, the Rebbe goes in to explain that in the Senate of the United States Senate of this country, the country of kindness, the Rebbe refers to the United States as the Malchus Shel Chesed, a country of kindness. That over there sit the representatives of the entire country, which most of them, the Rebbe says, are not Jews. They announced in a very official announcement. In other words, the announcement wasn't just one senator got up, but it was an official announcement, a law or whatever passed by the Senate. They spoke about the 12th and the 13th day of Tamuz. Something was read in the U.S. Senate in 1989 on this day. I don't know. We can look it up. What was that? They spoke about praise and thanks to the creation of the world. To the creator of the world and its conductor on the big miracle that happened many years before that to the leader of the generation. So it was some kind of Senate hearing in which recognition was given to the significance of that day. What does it have to do with the United States? Something that has to do with Russia. But because of the miracle that happened on the 12th of Tammuz is what brought the previous Rebbe to come to the United States of America, in which he did his work in the last 10 years of his life. And I'm just reading it in English instead of reading because I want to go a little faster now. From where he spread Torah and Judaism and where he spread the well springs of Hasidus outward to the entire world and in a way that keeps on increasing more and more and more, 40 years after his passing. And whether in both ends, spreading Torah and the well springs to the Jewish people and spreading morality and the charge to do good, morality and correctness to the nations of the world as well. Because we know that the Rebbe was the first Jewish leader who took an actual initiative to spread to the nations that they should keep the 7 Noahide laws. Which is all the Rebbe says, a preparation for the time when God says, I will turn over the nations to serve God with one shoulder. Now, by the way, we're watching that already. You watched Milei in Argentina. You're watching more. And the Abraham Accords is huge. And it wouldn't surprise me if tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, there will be some more interesting announcements regarding more nations that are deciding, instead of fighting Israel, but to cooperate with Israel, without making demands of Israel to make concessions on the land that God gave to the Jewish people. I don't know if you heard this, but there is something stunning development that's taking place now. 16, I think it's 4 or 8, but maybe they represent 16, I think something like that. I think it's 4 that were very public, but then representing 16. How do they call him? A sheikh? Or Arab, like Muslim leaders who live in the cities of Hebron, which is in Yehuda and Shomron, what the world mistakenly calls, or deliberately mistakenly, wrongly calls, West Bank. So we know that till now they were all part of the Palestinian entity. 16 of them broke away from the Palestinian thing and sent a request to Israel that they want to recognize Israel as a Jewish state. They represent, I think, 800, tremendous amount of followers. Thousands upon thousands of followers. I remember the number. who want to sever their ties with the Palestinian thing. They say that the Palestinian cause is only wreaking havoc and death. Instead, they want to recognize Israel as a Jewish state, but they want Israel to recognize them as the Emirates of Hebron, which means as Arabs, as Muslims, who very much will respect Israel, and they live in Israel together with the Jewish people. Unheard of. We saw the UAE do that, the United Emirates, and now it's happening in the heart of the territory of the Palestinian people. Shouldn't shock us, because the verse says, I will convert the nations. I will convert the nations. Moments before the nations are converted, you see amongst the nations the biggest anti-Semitism, the biggest hatred. But that's because everybody's being dragged to the conversion. And you're watching. This will just spread. They're saying that the Abraham Accords now are going to go on steroids. Wouldn't shock me. Seems like Syria is going to come into the fold. Talking about the arch enemies of Israel are going to make peace with the fact that Israel is a Jewish state and they have a right to their land. And very, very soon, I believe, they are deliberately and happily going to say, let's pack our suitcases from the Temple Mount, remove our things, let the Jews have what really belongs there. We don't want it to be removed through some force. We want they themselves to dismantle what they built over there to make room for Mashiach. There's definitely going to be such a process. I don't know if, exactly which parts of the redemption are going to come in this way, but it definitely is in sync with what the Rebbe is saying over here. A rectification, a transformation. So he says the fact that in the Senate that year in 1989 they made such an announcement, the Rebbe sees that as messianic. It's all part of this idea. Okay. So let's do quickly. I'm already teaching 2 hours and 32 minutes. In chapter 7, the Rebbe says, let's add on greater emphasis and greater understanding on the importance and the significance of the influence on the nations regarding the Geula of the 12th day of Tamuz, even more than the 19th of Kislev. Now, till now, the Rebbe said both of them are on the same line. But now the Rebbe is explaining that the 12th of Tamuz, which is the day of the redemption of the previous Rebbe, even surpasses the 19th of Kislev. Why? In this particular idea of influencing the nations. It's much closer to Mashiach. Why? It is known, he says, the Alter Rebbe, his attitude towards Russia and France, that in the time of the war, when the war between Napoleon and the Tsar broke out, the Alter Rebbe very much was routing for the Russian Tsar. And the reason for that was because he felt that if Napoleon will win, it will cause, we spoke about this many times, it will cause a great breakdown in Jewish observance. Jews would be thrust very quickly into a society that would kind of open up the doors for them to secularize, so to speak, to mix amongst the nations. And that would be too quick. And a lot of Jews would feel that influence, and they would be the modernization would kill their observance. And it would be devastating for the religiosity of the Jewish people. So the Alter Rebbe felt that the Jews would be better under the Tsar, even though it meant physical oppression. Even if it meant the continuum of ghetto life, that kind of thing. And like we see, the Rebbe says that in all the generations, from the Baal Shem Tov to my father-in-law, the previous Rebbe, in the earlier days, the revelation of Hasidus was taking place in Russia and the countries associated with Russia. Ukraine, this, that, these are all that area. The Western Europe was not influenced by Hasidism. From this it's understood that even after the Alter Rebbe's redemption on the 19th of Kislev, which was a great wonder in the eyes of the ministers and the nations, there were still pockets in the world that were still resistant to holiness, including that is France. So Russia was already being was already being sublimated, transformed. It was still anti-Semitic, but God conscious. But France was still impure. So France remained a barrier, a stubborn holdout that would not allow God to enter into it. And that's why the French were very their behavior was very inconsistent with the fear of God. As everybody knows, the French were very promiscuous and so on and so forth. In all matters of immorality, it was very, very much. France was kind of the leader of the world in all of this, in all sinful behavior. Then came, the Rebbe says, my father-in-law, who years even before he became the Rebbe, he visited France, and his presence over there was already a purification. And after he left Russia, after the redemption of the 12th of Tamuz, he sent his emissaries to France. He also sent teachings of Hasidism there. And it's continuing to grow until today. Like we're seeing in the later years, recently, the Rebbe is talking 1989, but in the 80s and in the 70s, France suddenly exploded with communities in France became very, very active in Judaism. And there were a lot of Jews who were far from observance became observant. There was a great tshuva movement in France. The Rebbe marvels at the idea that France, which was a place of such opposite of Judaism, and now Judaism is thriving and kicking. To the Rebbe, that's the greatest thing. If it would happen in any other country, in Uganda, it wouldn't make a difference. Not so. In France, why? Because France, it's because holiness is permeating even the lowest places. That's the idea. And many of the Jews over there got close to Torah and to Yiddishkeit, and the Rebbe emphasizes, and became Hasidim. Mikusharim l'nasi ador. They became Hasidim of the Rebbe. Balak. And they learn his Torah. And many of them are becoming leaders. These are Frenchies, non-observant Jews who became Jewish, and they became they became observant. And then they themselves became shluchim and emissaries of Chabad and are creating communities at wow. Through their spreading of Torah and Yiddishkeit and Afatzas Samayanas. So much so, they're beginning to have an influence even on the Gentiles in France. That they should keep the 7 Noahide laws. What does that mean? So you see that the redemption of the 12th of Tammuz emphasizes the power and the influence on the nations of the world all the way to the lowest parts. Even the country that the previous Rebbe's great-great-great-grandfather, 5 generations before that, 6 generations before that, was scared of because it was so impure. His great-great-grandson penetrated. And this completes the preparation for the complete redemption. Because then it's going to be in the literal and in a revealed way that Hashem is going to have a home in the lowest worlds, in the lowest that it isn't possible any lower than it. And to emphasize this even more, he says in chapter 8, that emphasizes even more, is that by the Farbrengen by our gathering, the Rebbe says, on the 12th day of Tammuz, in the courtyard of the previous Rebbe, there is a group of French Jews over here, the Rebbe is saying, by the Farbrengen, which are people who didn't grow up observant, but now they're Hasidim, and they're permeated with Hasidus. They're here now. So it's not just I'm talking about something that's happening. And therefore, the Rebbe says we should give them all Lchaim. The Rebbe is giving them a Lchaim. And they should sing a joyous song. And what did they sing? They sang the French. The Rebbe told them to sing the French national anthem that the Rebbe says has become a Hasidic song, which is called what is it called? The Marseille. What do they call the song? Dun 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 dun. Yeah, Shemenagna Moisei, in which they started singing on Aderes V'Amun L'Chai Elamim. And the Rebbe says in footnote 83, and to note, he says that in these days, it's 200 years to the French Revolution. That the Alter Rebbe was afraid of this revolution. It was a revolution to overthrow the fear of God. So it's 200 years of the French Revolution. And the Rebbe says, and even this we're converting to holiness. Because we have now another French Revolution. The French Revolution of taking a whole French community of people that were alienated from Judaism and flipping them over. And that's the revolution. A renaissance of Judaism in France. And he says, and this is particularly emphasized this year, again, 1989, because it's the 200th year of the birth of the Tzemach Tzedek, third Chabad Rebbe, who his two names, Menachem Mendel, are the names of Mashiach Tzidkenu. The Rebbe had to put that in there. The name of the Tzemach Tzedek are the names of Mashiach, which when he will come, it will complete the purification of all the nations. I wonder why the Rebbe had to put that in there. Because the Tzemach Tzedek's names are Mashiach's names. Anyways, let's learn the final Hira. So what does he take out of this? This is all a lot of information. What do we do with this? So let me read this very quickly. To bring this all down to action, what does this all mean? When we're standing at the Chag HaGeula on the 12th of Tammuz, that falls out on Shabbos, Parshas Chukas Balak, where it says that Hashem is prophesizing about the two Mashiachs, King David and after midday. The Rebbe's Farbrengen was held already after midday, which is the end of Shabbos, which is called the will of all wills, right? Zman HaMincha, the time of Mincha, when we're reading already Parshas Pinhas, which is Eliyahu the prophet, who is the one who brings us the news about the redemption. We have to emphasize with greater emphasis that the Jewish people need to strengthen their emunah in the coming of Mashiach and in their longing for Mashiach. And that we should await his arrival every day, particularly and specifically through learning Torah about redemption. I think this is the first time the Rebbe mentions this, because in 1991, the Rebbe took this idea and made it a major principle, but this is still 1989. I think this is the first time that I know that the Rebbe said that in order to bring Mashiach, we should learn about the redemption. How should we learn about it? In Parshas HaShavua, which means in the weekly Torah portion, in the book of Rambam, in the two last chapters of Rambam, which are called the Laws of Kings and the Laws of Melech HaMashiach, and which when we learn in all of this, this will help speed up the redemption. It's funny, in 1991, the Rebbe adds, and also in the teachings of Chassidus, and primarily in the teachings of the leader of the generation, Likutei Sichos. So one of the only places the Rebbe refers to the leader of the generation as the one who made the Likutei Sichos, which is himself. He usually always says the leader of the generation, my father-in-law. But this time, because he wants us to know that he wants us to learn the Likutei Sichos. He says in the writings of the leader of the generation, but that's what he adds over there. Here he doesn't say it. Here he says in Parsha and in Rambam, you see how the Rebbe is advancing things throughout the years. And to add more is that we should increase in spreading Hasidus everywhere, teaching the previous Rebbe's teachings, his Memorim, his Sichos, and spreading Judaism in general in the entire world. Also constructing holy buildings, which I'm involved with now as well, a very holy one. And the Rebbe even promised that that he himself is going to participate in giving $100 to every person who added in holy construction. The Rebbe even said, even if you add onto your house a little bit, but if your house is a house where you do mitzvahs, if you added renovation, the Rebbe wanted in 1989 that everybody should add. And he said, anybody that will write that they added, I'm sending him $100 as participation. Anyways, this is the message over here. And the main thing is that through all of this, Mashiach should already be revealed, and so on and so forth. Okay. This is our learning for tonight. As I told you, totally random, in the sense that I didn't prepare this. I just took out a book and read. I tried to find something to teach. I wasn't having any luck. This was, I guess, what we needed to learn tonight. May it fully manifest and reveal itself. Tonight is this great holiday of the 12th of Tamuz. May its light complete bring us to